Hey Raghunath, tell everyone about our Patreon community.
Sure, Kaustubha. The Wisdom of the Sages Patreon community is an incredible online yoga resource. If you like the type of yoga wisdom and culture we share on the show, then our Patreon community is a great next step. This is a listener-supported podcast, and any level of sponsorship will unlock a wide range of live and archived classes, talks, and even workshops.
Raghunath teaches, I teach, and we have a host of other excellent teachers on topics ranging from yoga philosophy, asana classes, storytelling, Ayurveda, kirtan, cooking, meditation, and a lot more.
We even have an incredible online Bhakti 12-step recovery group.
So if you want to check it out, go to patreon.com/wisdom of the sages.
All right, let's get it on.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Live from Super Soul Farm, this is Wisdom of the Sages, a daily yoga podcast with your host, Raghunath, and co-host and senior educator at the Bhakti Center in New York, Kaustubha Das. Welcome to the show. Welcome to Sleep In Sunday and Interview Sunday, and welcome to everybody who's listening on Facebook. We usually don't do this on Facebook. We do it on weekends, Saturday and Sunday. If you want to join us every day for our study of the sacred literature of India, the goal of the yoga tradition, which is bhakti, or connection through devotion. We study this every day, the Srimad Bhagavatam, 18,000 verses. We don't study all 18,000 every day, but we dive into this book and we tear it apart and tease it out and try to find out how it's relevant, practical, and useful in our life. And Saturday is interview day. By the way, if you're writing in, you can, Saturday is question day. And we encourage people of any question you have, write it in to Mara. Here's our, Mara's our, what do we have an official title for Mara?
Executive producer.
Executive producer. Sorry about that. Get our t-shirt, please. Mara's our executive producer. You got a question, you write it in. Wisdom of the Sages 108 at gmail.com. Wisdom of the Sages 108 at gmail.com. And we take your questions. We field them all, and we read them on Wednesday. Sunday is interview day. We have a great special interview today with Dhanya, who's incredible. She's she's multi-talented, and she's a pretty new mom too, which is probably her favorite job, because I know parenting is my favorite job, even though we hold many hats in this world. But we want to welcome Dhanya to the show. Welcome, Dhanya.
Thank you so much for having me, Prabhu.
It's actually welcome back.
Right.
Dhanya is an incredibly empowered musician, talented singer-songwriter, has incredible CDs out that me and my family love to listen to on Spotify. But today she's also a therapist, especially dealing with couples. So we bring in a lot of questions that couples are going through to smooth out relationships, because if there's no peace in our relationships, it's hard to have peace with God. And so we're going to talk about a spiritual therapy and how we can apply some practical tips on our spiritual path, dealing in relationships today. And Kaustubha, you want to say anything else about Dhanya, or you want to dive into some questions?
Let's hit the full bio here for Dhanya. Dhanya Rico holds a master's degree in counselor education and holds a specialist degree in couples and family therapy. Her counseling approach focuses on creative and spiritual wellness. She aims to help individuals and relationships thrive with deep spiritual principles at the core of the therapeutic experience. And in addition to traditional counseling modalities, Dhanya is passionate about developing therapeutic tools that incorporate bhakti principles and practices as a means of reconnecting with our essential nature. So, Dhanya, if I understand correctly, you have a practice down in Florida, that where anyone that may or may not have a particular spiritual path in their life, you'll treat. Right. But also specifically your passion, so to say, is is in this kind of working with someone through applying bhakti principles in the therapy. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I do have just kind of the regular run-of-the-mill counseling practice for people who maybe don't identify with the spiritual path. But even then, the counselor always brings in kind of like their half of the therapy relationship. So there's always going to be some component of spiritual exploration, because that's what I tend to bring in. And there's definitely room for that in counseling, even just from a clinical perspective.
Yeah.
Kind of more like in the way that like AA and NA works at like what is your understanding of higher power kind of thing. But yeah, what I'm really into, because I'm into bhakti, is okay, so what's the connection between bhakti and mental health? If everything can be spiritualized, from my microphone to my parenting to my music, like why not counseling? So, but you got to be careful in how you do it, because it's obviously a delicate subject matter. So yeah, that's what I'm interested in developing.
Okay. And before we go further, I just want to mention that if we have time today, we would love to give, kind of open up some questions from our chat board for people that are here with us live on Zoom.
That
So
would be
if people
awesome.
have, as we go through, if anyone has any questions, please go ahead and throw them up on the chat board. And executive producer Mara is here to kind of collect some of those if we have time. Okay. So you're opening there. It brings up an important question. I think a question that might be on the mind of a lot of spiritual practitioners, and maybe to some people, this question almost sounds, I don't know, naive, but to others, it might sound like really relevant. That if my yoga practice, if my bhakti practice, if my spiritual practice is effective, doesn't it address all my whatever mental health issues that I might have, or shouldn't it affect that? Like if yoga is really about gaining control of the mind, shouldn't just practicing yoga on its own do the job? And why would I need to seek any other kind of counseling that's coming from, well, you could tell me more of what the sources of your training are coming from. I don't, from the types of mental health sources that are regularly used in modern day therapy.
Mm. Yeah, I think it's a good question, because there's people who come to bhakti not having, like, let's say, grown up in it or been exposed to it, and so it's so refreshing and so comprehensive that it feels basically like the panacea. Like, I found bhakti. This is the be all end all to any issue that I may need to address. And on the transcendental platform, that is true. So I have the fullest conviction, right? There's this like, you can't just chant all your problems away. You can't just, I actually have the fullest conviction that you can.
Okay.
I think that
That's good news.
on, on the platform of Shuddhanam, right? Of like pure chanting
Yeah.
and connecting with your 100% unmotivated, unadulterated, purest heart and mind. Yeah, I think that it does address every type of issue. But for those of us who are not chanting Shuddhanam, right,
Shuddhanam meaning like doing this meditation on the deepest level.
on the deepest level, pure, unmotivated, and also like not stopping, right? So it's continuous and pure.
Yeah.
Then yes, I do feel like it can. And there's so many stories. I mean, that those are the stories of the Bhagavatam. Those are the stories of the Chaitanya Charitamrita. Those are the stories of even modern day saints, people from even Prabhupada's time forward. Yeah, I think that it can. I think that it is the ultimate purifying medicine for all ailments. But not all of us are chanting Shuddhanam yet. And so for me, any kind of tool that can be used in the service of bhakti, or in the service of me developing that pure chanting, like, why would I not want to take advantage of that? Right. So I find that, going to counseling or getting mental health support is the same as like, I want to learn how to cook. Why don't I apprentice under a chef, or go hang out with some of my very talented culinary friends, or read a cookbook? It's like, it would be crazy to just think I'm just going to hop in the kitchen and figure it out myself. Although there may be some windfall and I might be like, wow, I figured it out on my own. Or using props in yoga. I hear so many yoga teachers, and maybe this is your experience, Raghu, of people who are like stubborn to not use a prop because they think that it's more advanced in yoga not to. So, no, I don't need it. I'll just, and then they like pull a hamstring or they like
Use a
twist their
prop.
back.
Use a prop. Use a prop, people.
Yeah. So there's like this element of humility that I think is so important in admitting that we could use some help, and then finding somebody who specialized in that particular kind of help. I feel like that's helpful, and I think that a lot of our teachers are seeing how mental health affects communities and how important it is for people to get that support.
Are,
Right.
are you familiar with any examples? I mean, you see, I'm appreciating what you're doing. It's like, say, I felt the need to seek something as a Bhakti-yogi. I was dealing with depression or some other kind of mental health issue. And so I said, oh, well, here's Dhanya, and she understands my spiritual practice. But can you foresee a problem if someone sought that kind of help with someone that didn't really understand the nature of the spiritual practice?
Well, this is kind of the area that I'm navigating, because as a student of counseling, I had a little bit of a hard time finding like theoretical orientations or schools of thought that really addressed all the angles of my spiritual practice, right? Because mainstream counseling mostly is oriented to adjusting you such that you fit back into the current system.
Mm-hmm.
And so if the current system is like capitalism, if the current system is consumerism, is exploitation of women's bodies, is exploitation of natural resources, is, that kind of thing, then how does that fit with like Bhakti principles? How does that fit with Bhakti principles? And is that really the kind of help that I want to get? Is it just going to basically like adjust me so that I'm a cog in
Do I really want to be normal, if that's what normal
Yeah,
is?
exactly. And what is who's defining what mental health is, like what is
Right.
healthy and what is normal? There's that famous quote, which is attributed, I guess, to many people, but it's kind of like, if you're trying to be sane in an insane world, like it's not really a marker of health, right?
Sure. I think Krishnamurti had a famous quote like that. Or something.
Yeah,
But it's
and
just like
Bhakti
by
Tirtha
others.
Swami kind of elaborates on that, which is like you can't work within the system if the system has values that don't align with your own values. So that's certainly been a challenge for me as a student, and then for me as a practitioner as well, because I have that ethical dilemma of wanting, hopefully the highest good for my clients, and seeing that, clinically sometimes that means adjusting them to a world that's like really crazy and doesn't align with values that I can really respect and get behind. So yeah, I do think that for people seeking support, and not necessarily to the extent of like severe depression, which is sort of the hallmark symptom of needing counseling, but even using it kind of like a gym of like, I want to get tools to communicate better. I want to have improved relationships in the workplace, or, get along better with my kids, or do some kind of like soul searching and become more introspective. Yeah, it's very challenging for people who are into bhakti to find counselors who really can understand the full scope of their practices and of their values and beliefs. I certainly think that's a challenge. It's not to say it's not possible, but it's a challenge.
Right. So do you see what you're doing as, in a sense, as a type of fusion from, fusion of what you've gained in the professional field, or, through your education in mental health, fusing that with your principles that you've learned as a yogi?
Yeah, I guess I don't really feel like it's necessarily that I'm fusing it. It's just I'm kind of doing the recon work for my clients of like, in this modality this really fits, and in this modality this really fits, and in this modality. So what I'm doing is just kind of like stockpiling tools and resources that I feel like we can plug in according to people's values and according to where they're at, bhakti practice or otherwise. That's what I'm going to be doing with clients. Now, it's cool when people with a bhakti practice come in, because then I have a better understanding than I would of, let's say, like mystic Judaism or, Islam. Or so it allows us to kind of speak the same language with more fluidity.
Right. Nice. All right. So, that's interesting. If I'm understanding what you're saying is like, I want to practice bhakti and I want to practice it deeply. And if I am practicing it on a super deep level, it's your faith is that that'll take care of any mental health issues that I have. Although I guess on a super highest level, you begin to appear like you have mental health
Yeah.
issues, perhaps.
Exactly. It goes full circle.
Okay. At least, yeah, to the people that are quote unquote normal, you may appear abnormal. But to get to that point where I practice it deeply, it may be that my mental health issues are an obstacle. So therefore, let me seek out some help.
Hmm.
And that brings me to the idea of like a really popular topic, I would say in the Western yoga world right now, is the idea of self-care. Right. Raghunath and I both have our ideas about self. We're kind of like into it and not into it because it really depends how you define it. Right.
Yes.
But how would you define self-care? And do you feel self-care is important? And if so, how do you try to help people with that?
Yeah, I also have a little bit of like a friction with the term of self-care. Psychology is just like a thing that once it makes it into the mainstream, all these concepts get warped, and so it's interesting now. Like everybody and their grandma does self-care, and anything under the sun is self-care. Like I ate a donut, self-care. I went shopping, self-care. Like
I've been doing a lot of self-care lately.
So it feels like, self-care is the new, like self-indulgence.
Yes. Okay.
Right. That's what it
And
sometimes
so,
can be.
and so we want to be careful with that because from the perspective of like relationship care and mental health, and especially from Bhakti, self-care is really not self-indulgence. It's usually heading in the opposite direction on that spectrum, which is more so like self-reflection and being real with oneself and sort of taking stock of like, what is it actually that's going on and what is for my highest good, despite my tendency to want to instead self-indulge or self-soothe with like lesser coping skills. So it's basically like an inventory. You guys have your Makeover Monday, right? So it's like an inventory of where am I at really? And sometimes it's good to have like a buddy or a partner or some like accountability to reflect back to me where I'm at in terms of progress, and then making adjustments and committing to those adjustments. That's what I would consider self-care. It's those practices that are in alignment with my highest good, that push me forward, and that may include like a pretty significant challenge. So self-care is not always like this feel good, thing. Although, to be fair, a big component in the work that I do with self-care is regulating the nervous system, which is it's a big component in mental health because essentially if your nervous system is hyped up because of trauma, because of stress, because of whatever, it's going to be giving your mind the signal of like fight or flight. This is not safe. I don't feel relaxed. I'm not able to focus. And that's going to vibrate out as like anxiety, depression, anger, clashing with other people, insecurities, whatever. And so if you just address it on the platform of the mind, what happens is your body is still sending those chemicals, like on a physiological level. Your body hasn't really kicked into like, we're safe, it's okay, I'm going to get it into my japa practice, I'm going to have a good conversation with my spouse, whatever it is. So addressing the nervous system first is a nice way of kind of harmonizing your body and your mind and getting your body to be your ally in whatever you're doing. So sometimes that's when self-care becomes, okay, I need to take a walk.
Okay.
I need to drink some soup. I need something warm to wear. Right. And so addressing the kind of like physiological markers of like safety, relaxation, soothing, which easily slips into like a bubble bath, a box of chocolates, a donut or two, and then it starts getting kind of
some
slippery.
champagne.
It's all from a nervous system. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I like that. I think we could use that, Raghu, going forward. What do you think? You're muted.
Yes.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Sorry, I got some loud sheep in the background. I'm trying to mute out.
As we all do.
Sometimes
we
just
all-
hugging the sheep is self-care, right?
Hugging
but-
sheep is self-care.
And it's care
All
for the
that
sheep.
lanolin on their wool. Yeah.
But I like that idea that really we have a nervous system, and I think, I mean, you could probably define this better than I could, but it appears to me that our lifestyles are so crazy now. You know, where we work and what we expose ourselves to in terms of media and all that. That it's kind of brutal on the nervous system.
Oh yeah.
And so so there are disturbances and the body's sending all kind of signals that are making it difficult for us to be a good uh, deeply meditative, contemplative, yogi.
Totally. And it swings so far, right? Because we have like the high stimulation of like advertising, stress, like totally lopsided work schedules, even like the like volume of kids TV shows is like so like, oh, and then you like tune out and you're like Facebook, Instagram, and then it's like a total numbing out. So you're either like totally overstimulated and it's overwhelming and your senses are kind of going haywire, or you just like leave the building and you're in some other like stratosphere for a while and then you come back. And so your nervous system never gets the message of like, is everything going to be okay? Like it's very unnerving. It's very unnerving, and numbing becomes the new like self-soothing. I just check out. And then what ends up happening is it's impossible not to do that in your bhakti practices. I sit down to chant japa, and either I need to be constantly stimulated by something.
I
need
have to
like
pick up my
walking,
phone. I have to, whatever.
or I numb out, and I'm just like, oops, not able to.
Maybe we should make a rule. Maybe we should make a rule where japa, no phone. Japa, you got to keep them completely separate. That might be a very good. You know what? That's my makeover Monday. The phone is nowhere serious, right? The phone is nowhere near me. Who wants to join in on that one with me?
I'll
Keep
do
the phone
it.
away from you during japa time. Let's just try it. Experiment.
And that's a great excuse that if you don't answer the phone, just say, sorry, I was in my job time.
It was japa time, and make that sacred, right?
Yeah. Okay, so I think I like this it's actually clarifying for me that when I speak about self-care and when I respond to people, because my tendency is to be like a little skeptical.
Yeah.
And so like I think sometimes my answers may come off as a little callous. But yeah, kind of saying, yeah, if you're taking care of your nervous system for the purpose of your spiritual practice, then that's self-care within a yogic perspective that makes sense. I like
Yeah, and this is why it's nice to have somebody like a counselor even or accountability buddy to check in with, because what I think might be self-care might be self-indulgence or might be escapism.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I just need to take a nap might work, but I'm taking 2-3 hour naps every day, and it's starting to get in the way of my workflow or my job or my whatever. It might be nice to have somebody check in and say, I've noticed you've been so. That's when like that conversation piece comes in to check in.
It's gone from a tune-up for your spiritual practice and your responsibilities in life to an escapism from your spiritual practice and your responsibilities.
Yeah, from a tune-up to a tune-out.
Okay, gotcha. Very good. Tune-up to tune-out. We'll keep that in mind. Now, as it is Valentine's Day, it would be appropriate perhaps to shift the conversation now to and to what's part of your specialty. Is relationship counseling. Okay. And so we have this, Raghunath and I and Mara, we kind of marvel every day at how great this Wisdom of the Sages community is. It's like so many wonderful people participating, thousands. And the ones that we know personally are really inspiring to us, that they're coming to Bhakti on coming from so many different angles.
Mm-hmm.
But and I would say that our median, from whatever stats we have there on Facebook or other places, I would say that the medium, age range for our listeners is probably like somewhere 30 to 45, something like that. Is that about right, Mary?
Yeah, I'd say that's accurate.
So a lot of people discover. A lot of our community are discovering Bhakti a little bit later in life, mid age. And it's not uncommon at that, like when Raghunath and I, in our era, right, Raghunath, when we got into Bhakti, when almost everyone that got into Bhakti at that time, was 20 or teenager or 21, right? And so kind of you weren't tied down in the ways, like married, children, career, all of that. Now we're getting a lot of people that are coming to Bhakti, but they're already tied into a world that doesn't understand it, even in the most intimate way with, like, say, their spouse. So is this something that you come up with commonly? And I'm sure people have questions, like we get, it's natural to have a question like, well, now how do I get my spouse into it? you know um is this the best strategy? Is that the kind of thing you deal with
How
a
do I
lot?
change my
I want
spouse?
to change them into
Hmm.
how do I change my spouse into a Hare Krishna devotee?
How do I convert my spouse? Let's face it, that's the question on everybody's mind.
We need an answer to this question.
Yeah, I think it's such a great question because, one thing I want to say is, as intense as that can sometimes come off as like, how do I make them like what I like? Um, it's a testament to how exciting bhakti is. It's a testament to like how psyched people are when they get into it and how
Yeah.
amazing they think that it is for them. And so naturally with anything that you like, you want to get somebody else into it. Right. So like,
It's
my husband.
natural. Yeah. I remember when I
Yeah.
first got into it, I was like, now I'm just going to explain to all my friends and they're all going to immediately understand it like I do.
Yeah.
My family's gonna be so excited about this.
I
Yeah.
discovered it and now everyone will appreciate it.
Yeah. They'll like the outfits most of all. Yeah. So, I think it's certainly a challenge though, because it's a little bit heartbreaking, when you come to spirituality. Already to be in any spiritual practice is like a massive undertaking of vulnerability, because to make any kind of progress, your heart has to be open and further gets open with ongoing development and growth. So to come with that like open heart, like excited for bhakti and like share it with somebody, family or partner or whoever, friend, and they're just kind of like, oh, cool. Like you just told them you discovered like there was a new like store in your mall or something like.
Or I'd imagine it could shift. It could be less than neutral and be like a spouse could
Yeah.
become really concerned.
That's a good side of it, Dhanya, when they say, oh, cool. A very real side is like, you're nuts, you're crazy, are you kidding me, what are you talking about? Or like, we are completely disconnected now.
Yeah.
How is this going to
Yeah.
affect our sexual relationship? How is this going to accept how
My
we raise our
diet,
children?
you're not going to cook burgers for me, what are you, crazy? This is no way. This is a deal breaker.
Totally. And I can relate on some level, because I had a lot of extended family that were not into it, and were not into it in that very either overt way of just like, that's weird, don't bring that around here, or in a covert way of kind of like passive aggressive little jokies.
Sure.
And so, or they'll do the thing of like, yeah, no, we ordered pizza. You could just peel the pepperoni off if you want some, and like just not connecting on like what this means. So yeah, I mean, it's a serious question, and it's got a lot of ramifications, because in every way, bhakti, it requires a lifestyle shift. It's not just a set of beliefs, it's actually practices, and it affects basically every sphere of your life. And that's a good thing, actually.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that, anytime that you practice anything with your partner or your family of origin, it's going to be like the tip top highest challenge, because there's so much conditioning there. There's so much history there. There's a lot of vulnerability, and there could be a lot of missed signals and mixed communication. So it's good to know that that's actually the hardest challenge. So when you come up against those responses that feel unfavorable, that feel unsupportive, you should know that you're kind of like in Nintendo games, like on boss mode, like you're not playing like the lesser levels of difficulty. You're playing the maximum level of difficulty, right?
Most sensitive sphere you're going to work
The most sensitive, and ideally
boss mode.
Yeah.
What does that mean? That's like
Bo-
the tough level.
It's the toughest level. Literally,
Okay.
It's the toughest level. It means that you've encountered so many other situations that may have challenged your beliefs, but now you're encountering like the biggest challenge, the people who know you best, the people who live with you, the people who know your insecurities and your shortcomings, and and will even challenge like, well, are you really going to commit to this bhakti thing? And are you really, it can get really heavy really fast. So understandably, this is quite a challenge. This is not something that's meant to be done alone, would be the first thing that I would say to someone in this challenge, right? You need to have your people and you need to have your community that validate and support the bhakti practice you already have, right? And
So,
that allow,
yeah.
sorry.
No, that's great. Like, you're right now, you're speaking from one angle that I do want to hear about. Like, in other words, my relationships with those that are close to me and how it affects my own personal practice. So
Right.
please continue this, and then let's also talk about like maybe the fear of a spouse might have
Yeah.
of the changes that are taking place in my life and how one may best navigate that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, in terms of my own personal practice, even if I'm encountering an unfavorable response, what I think is an unfavorable response at home or with my family, it's important for me to stay connected to the community and to the practices that make my bhakti feel alive and make my bhakti feel real and give me um, that undercurrent of just like steadiness and connection that validate why I want bhakti in my life. And ideally, by getting really deep into these practices, I'm developing the qualities it will take to go back out there and encounter that unfavorable response. I'm going to develop ideally the qualities of a Brahmin, right? Patience,
Mm.
steadiness, even cleanliness, right? Are my thoughts clean? Are my words clean? Am I doing this in a clean way that feels ethical on both sides, right?
Yeah.
Am I able to understand the philosophy? Do I even get it? And then how do I work on communicating it, right? Do I share it with other people, not just the people that I'm like trying to get into it? Do I share it with other people just for their own benefit? Or do I want them to get into it so it fortifies my faith? So do I selflessly give this
Mm-hmm.
message to other people as well? And sharing bhakti is a big component of our particular branch of bhakti, which is Gaudiya Vaishnavism. And it's not just sharing it with the people that I want to get in it so they can practice it with me. It's literally sharing it with whoever I encounter to some dimension. So that fortifies the way that I explain bhakti, and that helps me understand it better. So, getting into that space where I feel really comfortable and I have spaces where it is safe to practice, that's necessary always, regardless of who's on board and who's not.
That's really interesting. So, in a sense, what you're saying is like, because there is a like quote unquote like missionary aspect to the bhakti idea. It's common that we're trying to share it, but it sounds to me like what you're saying is the healthier that we are mentally, the more purely we can share it, because otherwise our sharing may be mixed with all of our own types of insecurities. And so really at the heart of the sharing is really care about the other person. And if our sharing is blended with actually our own issues, right? It's
Yeah.
that conduit is not so pure. Right?
And it will be, right? All the way up until like the highest levels of bhakti. It's like karma mishra bhakti, jnana mishra bhakti. Like my bhakti is mixed with other intentions.
Mm-hmm.
The desire for liberation, the desire for knowledge, the cessation of suffering, the benefits of this material world, wealth, followers. I mean, every acharya in our lineage is warning us against this up until the highest levels of bhakti. So for those of us that are beginning practitioners, it would be natural to understand like, yeah, my conditioning is going to come through in my sharing this message. So better I take care to purify myself and to really be in the association of people who share it in a way that's like, wow, the way they share it, like that makes total sense. And it's transforming people and it's changing people's hearts. Like, let me hang out with those people and hopefully those qualities will rub off on me. Meanwhile, let me polish the mirror. Let me really work on myself. And for my clients, to be honest, to kind of address the other part of your question, I get this question all the time. I'm super into it. My spouse is not into it. My kids are not into it or whatever. And I always say the same thing. Really, the best preaching is a happy devotee. Are you happy, Prabhu? Like, are you joyfully performing devotional service in such a way that you're literally overflowing with joy? Like, are you coming at this from the perspective of like, this is great, in such a way that someone else is going to naturally be curious and say, you know what, ever since this person has been into this thing, they've been so kind, they've been so generous, they've been so patient, they've been so loving, They get me more. They take the time to really hear what I'm trying to say. They hold space for me so nicely. Their cooking has really taken off. Their singing has really taken off. Like all of these amazing qualities can be, extracted from a practice of bhakti, but it really has to be connected to the sincere experience of the other person. You can't just throw bhakti at somebody. It has to be something where you're living it so authentically that other people can't help but at least be curious or commend you for whatever's going on for you. That's ideal.
But let's say that sounds very rosy, and I'm all
Yeah.
into it. But basically my husband wants me to cook him meat, and no matter how cheerful I am around the house and how much I'm willing to listen, there's a real fear that I've changed. I'm married into one with a certain understanding of what this relationship was going to be like, and now my partner has radically changed their life, and I feel changed up.
Mm-hmm.
Is there some? I don't know if strategy is the right word, but some thoughts that you have on how one can navigate that.
Yeah. I'll say there's, he can open up a can of spam. The chat is like blowing up.
So you know what? Open up a can
That's
of
my
spam.
advice from a mental health perspective, signing off. This question is actually, it's been addressed by Prabhupada, and we've been in assemblies, in India, for example, in West Bengal, it's very common for people to eat meat or to eat fish, let's say.
Yeah.
Right? It's very common. And so there's people who are very serious practitioners of bhakti yoga in other cultural contexts and run up against this, and they don't necessarily have the resources that I as a Western woman have of just like, well, maybe I'll find another relationship. That doesn't exist in so many cultures. In the majority of cultures in the world, that doesn't exist. So it's a serious question. And I've heard our teachers say, okay, if it's a deal breaker and you feel that it's important for you to stay in this relationship and your husband wants you to cook him fish or your wife wants you to cook her fish, can you continue to perform your duty and offer even whatever it is that you're doing to Krishna with a prayer and say, Krishna, I want to be close to you. I want to be close to your devotees. I want to adopt as many of these practices and views and values as possible. This is my situation. Can I perform this as dharmically as possible and offer this to you? So accompanying it with a prayer. So I've literally heard, my spiritual master say, how many of you here, in an assembly of 10,000 Bengalis, 50,000 Bengalis, say, how many of you here have a partner who eats fish? And the majority will raise their hand and makes you cook it. And the majority will raise their hand. And he just says, continue your bhakti practice. There's literally no hard and fast rules for my bhakti practice. That means I can practice even when I'm doing these things that perhaps I don't want to do, but circumstantially I find that I'm in this place,
In other words, God knows your heart.
Yeah.
And so as you go through that, you can take some, rather than demand that your partner make a radical change against their will, that you can conform to that will, but internally you're there with God, I suppose, right? And feeling not unchaste to God in a sense is, I guess, what I'm looking for, right? But
Yeah,
doing
it's
what
the
you need to
purity
do.
of intention. Yeah, and Paramatma's in your heart, and Paramatma's in your spouse's heart, and Paramatma's in the fish's heart. The Paramatma's gonna be there for Paramatma's there for the entire experience. I think that purity is the purity of intention that you're talking about. That thing of Krishna really knows our heart, and I would say many times these challenges are actually there to purify us, to test our resolve, to help us kind of solidify our commitment, right? Because if my husband, making disparaging comments about bhakti shakes my faith, then it's important for me to go deeper in that faith, right? This is something that is obviously, maybe touching a nerve of some insecurity that I have or a doubt that I have, and that happens often. oh, what's with the goofy clothes? I'm like, man, I kind of have an issue with the goofy clothes too, or whatever it is, it might make us reflect on what it is that I might still have doubts on. And it's a good opportunity to introspect and say, okay, what are the qualities in me that I need to refine? Is this difficult? Yes. Like, it's an almost seemingly insurmountable level of difficulty. And that's why support is needed, right? So it's not that there's a strategy of like, here's the manual on how to convert your spouse. That would be crazy if I gave you that, because you'd be turning someone to bhakti against their will. And literally, bhakti is like the path of loving devotional service. It's all willpower.
Mm-hmm.
Literally, that's all you have to offer. Krishna's not into the food. He's not into the clothes. He's not into he's just into you willfully surrendering your time and attention to him and his devotees. So it has to be done of free will. That's the only thing we got. And so it's got to be done freely. So there's no question that there's a challenge, but it's important for the community to come together and support that person and validate that person's struggle and just be with them. It's different to have that challenge alone than to have that challenge and walk beside other people who understand you and support you.
So you're saying the devotional community, if it's insensitive, it might be putting pressure on you from one angle. Your spouse is putting pressure on you from another angle. And that could be really difficult, I imagine. All right.
Yeah. And then that necessarily turns inward and becomes, I'm a bad devotee.
Right. And I'm a bad husband or wife.
Exactly.
So so that's a question about someone who's discovered bhakti and come to it on their own, although they're with a spouse or family, whatever. What about when two people come together, right? Two people are coming together. Two people that practice bhakti come together as a couple. And I'd imagine, we should mention that you live in basically the largest bhakti community in America, right? So
in the
so
West, I think, yeah.
Yeah. So you do get people like there's a lot of Bhakti-yogi practitioners that might come to you. So let's say, a couple comes that they're both Bhakti-yogis. They may have a rosy picture of what that marriage life looks like based upon fantasy, maybe, or based upon what they've read in different bhakti literature. But it's not always so rosy when they get there. Is that a challenge that you face a lot, or do people come to you with that challenge?
Yeah, well, it was a well-phrased question, because it's a challenge for myself as a married bhakti practitioner to another bhakti practitioner. And it's also something that I see clinically, and it's a big ongoing conversation, because now, as you said, when you guys got into it, it was young people, it was single people. And now, a huge bulk of the bhakti community is people practicing in families. And some of those people got into it together. Some people grew up in it. So now it's like people who have 10, 20, 30 years of bhakti under their belt, so to speak. And so what's that like, living with somebody once, you're both in, like, okay, I'm in. So I think it's definitely a challenging thing to navigate. It's a balance, like everything in bhakti. From my personal experience and my clinical experience, there will always be this component of you got to fly your own airplane. Like, no one's going to fly the bhakti airplane for you. And Srila Prabhupada actually says it in those terms. He says, flying your own airplane.
Yeah, he says that in the context of, like, when we die, there's nobody there in one sense to hold our hand, right? It depends on our own practice and our own connection.
Yeah, because essentially it's like what's happening in your mind, and no one's there but you, and super soul is the witness. But you're really only with your mind 24 hours a day. And that person's only with their mind 24 hours a day. Like that. There's that. Is it weird to quote Metallica? Maybe not, right?
No,
There's that.
Not on Wisdom of the Sages, it's not.
So yeah, Metallica has that lyric that your lifestyle determines your death style. And so if at the time of death, my hope is that my meditation is on Krishna's lotus feet, or the lotus feet of the pure devotee, I have to be in that meditation throughout my life. That's what my lifestyle is going to be like. But my spouse is not in my mind, and I can't run the programs in their mind either. That's got to be a personal practice. So what helps me focus on that and keep that in my meditation and align with my service, find my service, perform it properly, get the right tools and the right support for that, is going to look different from person to person. And so acknowledging our own individuality, that's also like a very cornerstone teaching in Bhakti, which is, you know, Kaustubha Prabhu, you have your own individual super special seva that Krishna wants just from you, and it's going to look different than your wife's, and it's going to look different than Raghu's, and it's going to look different than mine and Mara's and everybody's. And Krishna actually wants a unique, special offering from each person. So that means likely there's going to be details in my practice that look different than Bali's, than my husband's. Mm-hmm. That's going to look different than my kids. So leaving room for that individuality, it actually helps people thrive because it allows them to cultivate their own individual offering. Now there's like the standard practices, chanting japa, same for everyone. 4 regulative principles, same for everyone. The foundational texts and scriptures, same for everybody. So in that way, I can kind of join in community. And those are the practices that Prabhupada encourages us to share, right? Do kirtan with your family. Read books with your family, discuss the teachings, but from different points of view. So it's that coming together of like, let's read the same book, but what's your perspective? What's my perspective? What realizations did you get from that? What realizations did I get from that? And what's going to happen is, because, you know, I didn't just likely pop onto this planet. I've had millions of births before me that accumulate millions of births worth of conditioning. I'm at a different level of development than my husband, say, or than my peers or my friends. So I might need to go a little slower. I might need to take more time. I might slip and not chant properly, not do my rounds, not read. So there has to be a space of non-judgment, of support, of honoring somebody else's process where I can witness another's bhakti experience and support them in the way that they need without that component of judgment of like, well, I'm chanting, so you should be chanting. Why don't we go on a japa walk together? You know, that kind of thing.
Is that a common issue? Like, in other words, one spouse was expecting more from the other spouse in terms of their practice and is disappointed, and then they're creating pressure?
Yeah, absolutely. Or they both like take off and do really well, and then one partner ends up like revealing to be human, and then they like slow down. And so, you know, there's peaks and valleys, right? There's peaks and valleys. But what's important, and I remind people of this a lot in my work, is that in bhakti, there's no loss or diminution, period. Krishna says that in the Bhagavad Gita. Anything that I've done in connection with my spiritual life is to my benefit and to the benefit of others. So to experience peaks and valleys down here is different than to experience peaks and valleys up here. Mm-hmm. Right? So I might be struggling with my japa 10 years ago, but that struggle is going to look and feel differently if I continue my bhakti practice after 10 years of really
putting... You'll be low on a high level.
Exactly.
You may be low, but you'll be low on a high level.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, so that's exactly what it is. So, you know, really what it takes for bhakti partnerships of any kind, friendship, service, guru, disciple, spouses, whatever, to thrive is a mood of wherever you're at, I'm supporting and I'm encouraging you. I'm taking out that component of judging or forcing or, you know, guilt tripping, all of that stuff that can come in. That's a symptom of my conditioning. I'm doing that because I'm conditioned, right? Not because I'm at some elevated spiritual level. The minute that I'm pressuring or guilt tripping or whatever, my spouse, my kid, my partner, I should know that my conditioning is coming into play. And there's a little light bulb that goes off of like, aha, more work to be done for me, actually, not for the other person.
This has been very helpful. Thank you. And we don't have so much time left. So I'm thinking we got about 10 minutes. Mara, anything from the chat board? Any questions you'd like to present?
Yeah, we have a couple questions here. One of them came in from somebody who asked, when is it okay to quit marriage?
Well,
be careful with this one.
You know, there's no like ethical way to answer that in a blanket way. There's really not, because each person's marriage is its own universe. So I would say that in order to address that question, you need to see somebody who's got the skills to understand your particular relationship, that configuration, where each person stands in the relationship, what your understanding of commitment is, what ramifications will come through the quitting of the marriage, what benefits may come. It's an elaborate question. I think that it would be like real speculation for me to be like, on day 634 of fights, that's the day.
Are there any certain lines that just can't be crossed that you would say would justify that?
Yeah, I mean, in our philosophy, and most of our teachers will say that in situations of abuse, there has to be space taken. There has to be space. There has to be,
and which may be divorce or might
absolutely
manifest in another way too.
Yeah, that is grounds for, because the commitment is already broken. It's not that the divorce is breaking the commitment, it's that the abuse is breaking the commitment. Right. And so that would be, definitely warranted. And this is about safety and well-being, that's definitely a line. And for some people, infidelity is the line. For some people, differences of religious practice is the line. So it's about what is the culture of your marriage. No one can make you stay married if you don't want, and nobody's going to make you get divorced if you don't want either. Mm-hmm. So it's important to understand, what is that definition of commitment for the marriage. And certainly once it comes into, situations of, abuse, then that's the next dimension. The commitment's already been fractured.
Thank you. Okay. Mara?
How do you handle maintaining healthy distance from someone versus being tolerant and patient?
Okay. So this sounds like a boundaries question, right? Healthy distance for me rings like boundaries. Boundaries are super important for bhakti because, if we're connected to our humility, we understand that our bhakti creeper is fragile. I'm liable to make offenses. I'm liable to misunderstand. I am liable to, having insecurities around my own personal spiritual practice. So, this is also something that has to be measured. Boundaries are meant to be personal and also flexible in the sense that anything that feels like very rigid, like just like a straight cutoff, obviously barring situations of abuse and, that kind of toxic stuff. It might be something that I cling to a little too rigidly. Oh, I don't talk to this person because they're not down with my bhakti, or I don't, that kind of thing. That might be necessary for a time in order to strengthen my bhakti. That might be necessary for me to really kind of get with it and take stock of what I need to do in terms of my personal practice. And it is a form of taking care of myself spiritually. It's a form of taking care of myself psychologically. It could be a way of protecting my relationships. So boundaries for me are really healthy. What I would say is it has to be an ongoing conversation, and that piece of connecting with community, connecting with a professional, connecting with a mentor to say, does this boundary sound like something where I'm limiting myself and perhaps harming myself, or does this boundary sound healthy to you? How do you handle this situation? These are things that I think are really important because boundaries are not meant to keep someone out. The purpose of boundaries is to keep yourself in. That's the purpose of a boundary. The boundary is I'm keeping all of my stuff, my business, like in here. That's what a boundary is actually meant to do. When often, again, this pop psychology thing is boundaries are meant to keep all of you guys out there, and then I'm just gonna, So
what does that mean? Keep this in, more specifically.
Keep this in means be aware of where my energy is overreaching into somebody else's business. Be aware of when my energy is reaching into overdoing, right? Over functioning, burning myself.
So the boundaries that you're making, or boundaries that you stay within, is what you're saying.
Exactly right. Exactly.
Can you give me an example of that kind of boundary to help me better understand it?
Yeah, so we can actually use the previous circumstance that we were talking about. Let's say, my husband and I, we're both trying to get a set number of rounds done. And I'm going to take a walk in the morning, and I'm going to be outside because I find that the morning time is really conducive for me. I know that there's all kinds of talk about the Brahma Muhurta hours. I'm going to go out before sunrise, and it's really going to be like invigorating. And I ask him to come along, and he's like, no, I want to sleep in. I'm tired. I need to get my rest. Betraying a boundary would be, I think that your japa practice would really benefit if you just came on a walk with me. Don't you know the Brahma Muhurta hours are the ideal hours for you to, and then to be on a walk, chanting my japa, meditating on how I wish that he would come with me. And if he would just come with me, his japa would improve. Now I've left myself I'm not with my chanting. I'm not in my business. I'm with him. I'm in somebody else's sphere. Returning to myself, a healthy use of boundaries would be to say, okay, sure, maybe next time. And then boom, I'm back in myself. What am I chanting? What am I going to wear outside to keep warm? What is my focus? How long do I want to walk for? How many rounds can I really get done? Can I stay in a good meditation? So it's basically, it's allowing people to be who they are. And meanwhile, you keep yourself in resource, kind of focused on yourself.
And the mind challenge, and the mind is tending to pull us out of that boundary and be absorbed in, why didn't that person do what I wanted them to do, or
Minding
Yeah,
other people's
exactly.
business, basically.
Right. And the reverse of boundaries is also true, which is I wanted to go on a chapel walk and my mom wants me to come and cut down a branch at her house and I want to do it and she's kind of guilt tripping me to do it and I'm not really, and so I'm like, you know what? Okay, fine, I'll do it. So I go and do it, but then I'm resentful. And so what I did is I betrayed my boundary. My boundary was I wanted to stay with my meditation and I wanted to do that for her. So when's the time I can do that for her that will feel like the right time to serve? And when's the time that I give myself to sit and meditate and practice? That's a healthy exercise of boundary too. So not overextending in either direction where I'm controlling or I'm being controlled. That's what it is. It's like an appropriate distribution of power is what boundaries is.
Nice. Thank you. We're just about out of time. Raghunath, anything you'd like to throw in there before we cut out?
You know, I'm ready for your book. I'm ready for your couples bhakti psychology, but I'm ready for it. No, it's great. Oop.
Maybe
By the
we
way-
could bring Dhanya, maybe we could bring you back for another Patreon event sometime soon. Would that be all right?
Yeah, because people
Yeah,
loved
of
it.
course.
They were
course,
really
yeah.
well received.
And if people don't know, this is her husband doing the closing song here, Bali from the Mayapuris. We play this every day. It's become part of our life.
So awesome.
We want to thank you, Dhanya. It's a
Thank
great
you.
pleasure. I love just like sitting and listening to you. You're one of these people that I become quiet around and just want to listen instead of just blabbing like I usually do. How can people get in contact with you?
Well, I'm working on getting my website up, but for now, people can just shoot me an email or follow me on Facebook or Instagram, Dhanya Music. My email is dhanyac@gmail.com. You know, just reach out personally. That's my favorite way to get in touch anyways.
Okay, Mara, can you put that
DHANY
back on the board? Yeah.
It's a DHANYC @gmail.com. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, everybody, for joining us on this Sunday. If you want to reach out to us and stay connected with us, if you're listening to us on Facebook, email us, wisdomofthesages108@gmail.com. Get the codes for Zoom. You can join us every morning or find us wherever you get podcasts. We're there. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Dhanya, so much.
Thank
Please come back.
you.